Hi there. Welcome along to the Bloody Scotland Book Club. This week, we are talking about three very different books. We're going to be chatting about Sherlock Holmes and the Sign of the Four. We're going to be talking about Lisa Gray's Thin Air, and we're going to be doing Vaseem Khan's Midnight at Malabar House. But first of all, I just need to say hi to everybody. Hi there.
Hello.
No, I was talking to the audience, not you lot.
Oh, sorry.
We've had enough chat already before we got on air. So for everybody on board, everybody that's tuned in, thank you very much for coming along. Hopefully we'll have a good chat about the books, but I'll just do a bit of introductions before we kick off, just before we start. One thing I would say to you is if you've got any questions, if you stick it in the chat function and they'll pop up, we'll get to as many questions as we can. So as we go through, quite happy chat to each other or put some questions in the chat function. That'd be brilliant. So let's start with Louise Fairbairn. Louise is a freelance production journalist, which means she writes headlines and corrects commas for a living. I could do with your services, Lou. When she's not earning a crust, she's usually to be found prone on the sofa. Oh no, with a crime novel in her hand. A crime fiction reviewer for Scotland and Sunday newspaper, she has chaired events at various book festivals online and in real life over the past few years. She's also been part of the judging team for the debut prize in New Zealand's Niall Marsh Awards for 3 years. She shares her thoughts in crime fiction, old and new, often at length, she says, at crimebookgirl.com. Hi, Lou. And we've got Jonathan Whitelaw, is an author, award-winning journalist, podcaster and broadcaster. And that's just between 9 and 12. The rest of the day, he's not that busy. After working on the front line of Scottish politics, he moved into journalism. Subjects he has covered are as varied as breaking news, the arts, culture, sport, fashion, music, and even radioactive waste. I need to find out about that. With everything in between. His latest book, The Village Hall Vendetta, is released on May the 11th and is the follow-up to the very successful Bingo Hall Detectives. Hi, Jonathan.
Hello. Thank you for having me, as always. Lovely to see everyone.
And last but not least, Mary Picken is a passionate book reader, and she really is. She loves all kinds of books, from 19th century novels to crime thrillers. She hates 18th century books, don't know why. Starts at the 19th and goes through to crime thrillers. No idea why. Her blog, Live and Deadly, is predominantly crime, psychological thrillers, and police procedurals, but there is a helping of literary fiction thrown in, and you can find her at liveanddeadly.net. Hi, Mary.
Hiya.
So how is everybody this evening?
All good, very well. Delighted to be here. It's only afternoon here, but Jonathan
is tuning in.
I don't think I've ever mentioned it, but I'm in Canada at the moment. I don't really talk about it all that much. Don't really talk about the minus 14s and the snow up to my ears and all the rest of it, up to my legs.
Okay, I'll make it worse. I'm in Spain at the moment, and it was 23 today and sunshine.
Edinburgh, it stopped raining, which is about all you can say.
Glasgow's wet and cold.
Oh, I feel really good about that. That's making me feel better already.
Can go off people,
So what we're going to do is do each of the books in turn. So we're going to kick off with Sign of the Four. So what we're going to do is Jonathan's going to do an introduction. Then we're going to have a little short clip of a video, and then we'll chat about the book. So over to you, Jonathan.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everybody. It's been an absolute delight this time round. I think as we'll probably get on to three very, very different books. I have the honour of championing Arthur Conan Doyle's The Sign of Four, or The Sign of the Four, as it's sort of variously been called over the years. And it's the second Sherlock Holmes adventure. And it's from 1890, I believe, so it's 143 years old. And I'm sure we'll get onto that in a second. But just as a very, very brief recap as to what's going on, it's the second Sherlock Holmes novel, as we talked about. The Master of Detection sits in a cocaine-induced haze at 221 Baker Street as a dense yellow fog swirls through London. His melancholy mood is only lifted by a visit from a beautiful but distressed young woman, Mary Morstan, whose father vanished 10 years ago. 4 years later, she began to receive an exquisite gift every year, a large, lustrous pearl, and now she has had an intriguing invitation to meet her unknown benefactor and urges Holmes and Watson to accompany her in an ensuing investigation which involves a wronged woman, stolen Indian treasure, and a love affair. Even the jaded Holmes is moved to exclaim, "Isn't it gorgeous?" which is about as exciting as he gets. And as Gordon said there, we have a little clip of the late and always great Peter Cushing as the eponymous Holmes.
That's why I came to you, Mr. Holmes.
Thank you. Postmark London Southwest, dated 7th of November. Ah, a man's thumbprint in the corner, probably the postman's. Best quality envelope, 6p a packet. You are a wronged woman. A carriage will call for you tomorrow evening at 5 o'clock and bring you to your unknown friend, and you shall have justice. If you are distrustful, bring 2 companions, but no police, and no signature.
But that means 5 today. Was there a Pearl with us?
Yes.
Same sender, then. What are you going to do, Miss Morstan?
I came to ask Mr. Holmes.
Miss Morstan, this is clearly a disguised hand, but I should not want to give any false hopes. Is there any trace of your father in this
I've
writing?
examined every word, every letter. There isn't the slightest resemblance.
Have you anything else which might help us?
I found this in Papa's belongings. I don't know whether...
Thank you. Ah, yes. This looks like paper of native Indian manufacture.
Look, 4 crosses in a line. The sign of 4.
Before we get to any spoilers. So Jonathan, we'll kick off with you. What did you think of the book?
I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed it. It's been a long, long time since I've read any Sherlock Holmes. And it's one of these things, right, where Sherlock Holmes is so perennially part of our culture, particularly crime writing, crime fiction. But actually, you know, unless you're a dedicated fan who's constantly reading this stuff, you don't actually get round to sitting down and reading it unless you've got a very, very good excuse. And there's no better excuse, quite frankly, than the bloody Scotland Book Club. So I was delighted, obviously, when it was decided that we were going to be reading it, because it kind of took me back about 20 years when I used to get I had a very, very well-thumbed, voluminous collection of all the Sherlock Holmes novels, or books and stories and short stories and what have you. But I got this one. I got it separately, and actually I was amazed at how short it is, because again, funnily enough, I mentioned that I was doing this, and I was championing the sign of the 4, and said that you don't realise quite how long or how short the stories are, because variously, you know, over the centuries they've been sort of collected together. So it was delightful. Really, really enjoyed the story. One thing that really, really struck me, and I'd be interested to get everybody's views on this, actually, is how kind of modern it feels. Like, it's 140 years old, as we talked about, as I mentioned at the start of the show, and not just the sort of forensic analysis, you know, all these elements that go in to make the character of Sherlock Holmes, but the sort of approach to the crime, to the solving of the crime. You see a lot of this stuff in modern police procedurals, as I'm sure we're going to talk about. Obviously, we've got various books to go through tonight. But it was refreshing to see that there's so many elements of it now. You know, it's maybe not as subtle as it can be to a modern audience. Obviously, it's told very much from the perspective of Watson, and there's an awful lot of explanation that seems quite. Sometimes it feels a little bit trite, because it's literally Watson telling you what's happened in the previous adventure. It's things like Holmes, who we previously said is a drug addict. You know, as opposed to it's sort of it's telling, not showing. You know, but again, like I said, it's 143 years old or so. But yeah, it's kind of modernity really struck me, and I wasn't quite prepared for it. I'll be honest with you, and it was nice. It was really, really good. But I thoroughly enjoyed it. It's a good old fashioned rollicking adventure, from one of the best. And interestingly, actually, the Peter Cushing portrayal there, that didn't really match up with my view of Holmes in this particular book, or indeed Holmes at all. He's much too jovial. He's much too happy, quite frankly.
For me, Holmes is Basil Rathbone.
Rathbone, yeah.
It's just like, you can't get past that. Mary, what did you think? Oops. All right.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. I kind of, it's a while since I'd read Sherlock Holmes, and I'd kind of forgotten the immediacy of how arrogant he is, which you get right at the beginning. You know, I'm going to take my cocaine because, frankly, the world is boring me. And and I love the names. Conan Doyle has a great penchant for all these brilliant names. So the detective's called Athelney, and the lodge is called Pondicherry, and I love that. But what struck me, and I know it struck Louise as well, so I'll let you have your tuppence worth too. What struck me was how incredibly racist it is.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Just a wee bit.
Just a wee bit. Yeah. I mean, I'm with Mary and Jonathan. I haven't read these in a long time. Love them. I have watched them more recently. And I'm a huge fan of Jeremy Brett. And it's no good. I'm a huge fan of Benedict Cumberbatch as well, even though they kind of ripped them up and stuck them together in all sorts of different shapes. But it's right. It's 18. This is 1890. It's the second Sherlock Holmes story. We are still reading them, watching them on stage. I read somewhere that he's the most portrayed. He's the most portrayed human literary character in terms of being filmed and TV and all the rest of it. I think people who've never read them or never even necessarily seen them have probably heard of Holmes, and they know the kind of general gist of his detectiveness, which comes in part from Conan Doyle's stint at Edinburgh University. One of his professors, Joseph Bell, was in the School of Medicine. This is one of his personal tricks. He said you had to diagnose the whole person, and you could find so many clues on seeing the person. It's kind of genius, and it's taken to extreme in Sherlock Holmes, but it's great, and we love all of that stuff. And it's London, it's immediate, it's all hansom cabs and train timetables, and a response by return of post, which in these days is incredible. But can it get past that really egregious lump of racism when Holmes is talking about the accomplice, for want of a better word. We have a main bad guy, and then we have an accomplice. I'd forgotten how bad that was, because I couldn't remember the whole story, and then you get to that point and you go, oh, I know what's coming, and it's just it's awful. But in this era of let's not use that word, sensitivity readers and rewriting, and they're doing it to Ian Fleming and Agatha Christie and all this, what would you do about Sherlock Holmes? You've only got 90 pages or thereabouts. If you take all these big chunks of the story out, you're not going to have very much left. And you sort of still need, if that is still going to be the accomplice, you still need to explain them. I don't know how you do it with things like this. I don't know whether, I'm a general person I don't entirely agree with the rewriting and the editing. I'm much more of let's just put a whopping great warning at the front and say, there's some horrible bits of whatever, racism, sexism, homophobia, or whatever, stick it in there. But then I'm not a person of color. I'm not gay. I am a relatively privileged white woman. So really, is it my place to say all this stuff? But God, you can't get past it in this.
I think for me, what was interesting though is remembering when it was written, because I think what's quite interesting about this is this must have been revelatory at the time when people read this, because it's so different. That idea that from a small, very small piece of something, you can extract all this information must have been like gold dust. Unfortunately, it's of its time. So in doing that, there is sexism, and it's just of its time. And I'm not sure you couldn't tone it down a bit. I think there would be ways, but the question for me is, if you know it was written about that time, can you park that? Because I think underlying that, Holmes has set off so many other people in terms of writers I know. I had a funny feeling. I remember sitting watching CSI one night, and I thought CSI would have died if Sherlock Holmes hadn't come along. And yet, what's strange is CSI, they find like one little flake of paint and they decide it was a 1934 Chevrolet, whatever, blah, 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 blah. It's not believable. Sherlock is. Yeah. It's just
racism apart, I love them. I will not stop reading them. And I just kind of swallow hard at certain moments like that. But the rest of it, no, it's great. It's fresh, it's lively, it's so well paced for something, and also for something that's so short. It's perfectly it's got the absolute perfect pacing. The temptation in a lot of modern novels, I find, is to just go hell for leather. And I'm not sure what day it is, what time it is.
Yeah.
Oh, wait a minute, it's like 3 days later, but that guy hasn't, gone to bed and hasn't had any lunch. But this is so lovely, beautifully paced. We've got, and okay, some of the explanations are a little bit on the lengthy side, but they don't kind of slow things down somehow. There's space for it. There's space for that lovely action sequence. There's space for that lovely
I agree.
thing.
I agree, and I think that was one of the things that struck me the most about it is just as I said, it feels very modern. Obviously, to a certain degree, it feels very modern, but I had some notion in the back of my head that it was maybe a little bit more recent than 1890. So I was massively surprised that it was so old. I know that sounds silly talking about Sherlock Holmes, but yeah, exactly as you say, Gordon. It's like how revolutionary was this? And revolutionary when it was first published.
I think
not just in terms of the content of the narrative, but the style that it's written in, the approach to to telling a story, to storytelling, and of course crime fiction. And that's something that's really, really struck me with going back to it. And it certainly wasn't something that I'd thought of when I first read them, but I think now, obviously, with those sort of 2 decades in between, and it has been 2 decades. That's the frightening part about it. But it had 20 years in between. Obviously, I've grown up to appreciate that the sort of construct of it, the mechanics behind moving the story forward, and again, very, very difficult to believe and get your head around that it is. It's ancient,
And Mary, you were going to say.
He does tell a cracking good story. There's no two ways about it. I mean, I just love the kind of, there we are, a man is dead, and we learn that he was afraid all of his life of a man with a wooden leg.
The other thing I think,
isn't it? Brilliant.
I think what's important though is you read them and you've heard the story, you've seen it in TV, you've seen it in a movie, right? I'd love to have been there when it came out. The freshness at the time would have probably blown your head.
Yeah.
It's so difficult to look. It's like Edgar Allan Poe. It's like any of those ones, or Jules Verne or H.G. Wells. You go back and you think, well, yeah, I've seen it, I've heard it. But at the time when they picked up that book, it must have been like, oh my God, like this is such a clever idea.
And that's the thing to try and get your head around is that, it's so difficult for us, particularly now in 2023, where we have all of human history literally at our fingertips, and all of human histories, all of human innovation and information, and not just that, opinion on it and what have you, all at the click of a button, sometimes not even that. And to look back on this piece of work with that sort of modern head on, I think is, it really, I mean, it's there aren't enough superlatives to describe just how talented someone like Arthur Conan Doyle is. And actually, I think, weirdly, I actually don't think he gets that sort of credit within a modern sort of critique, almost because there's been so much Sherlock Holmes, and I suppose that's the ultimate credit, isn't it? Is that the character is still going, and exactly as you said, Louise, he's been portrayed X amount of times on Y amount of media. And I think, I suppose, that is the ultimate tribute. But sometimes the actual source material, I think people forget about. And then when you go back to the source material, and it's not like, this is the thing about the Sign of the Four, it's the second adventure. So it's not like, we're 4, 5, 6 novels in, or 10, 15 years worth of writing this character in. It's the second one, it's the tricky second album, right? And yeah, it was great.
And Lou, I just reading some of the questions, there's Sue Monroe said, sharp contrast in books, an interesting change because they are all three. And Joan Fraser saying, I love the walk down memory lane, because that's what we're doing at the moment. But Rona McAdam has said, in terms of modernity, Holmes seems like many modern fictional detectives, obsessive, lone, addicted, kind of like, she even put in Rebus in there, that they're not part of what's going on, that they feel as if they're an outsider. And Holmes just seems to, because this whole thing revolves around the fact he's just bored unless he's got something to go and look at.
Yeah. Like
his life isn't fulfilled. And I love the beginning. I love that idea that what he's doing is sitting there deciding, will I have morphine or cocaine? I can't quite, I'm choosing here, Holmes, Watson, just give me a minute.
I went back this afternoon and I thought, because I had forgotten that you go straight in with that. And that hit me again. And okay, we know about cocaine, a 7% solution. But that's got to be quite a shock, both then and now. Not so much that it happens, but the openness of it, the everyday nature that he makes of it. Also, I went back and looked at the first few pages of A Study in Scarlet, completely different. There's quite a lot of preamble about Watson. It starts from Watson's point of view. It gives you a bit of his military background, and then they get into the meeting where he goes and he's looking for logics. This, wow, straight cocaine. Watson's pissed off. We get a case. How modern is that as a way of introducing a story? It's fantastic.
And Mary, one of the things I picked out as well is the Baker Street regulars are just, it's such a good idea. Just
this is where they're introduced, isn't it, for the first time, I think, this one.
Yeah, I think he mentions that they'd used them on a previous case, but that wasn't a case that we've had the story from.
But it's a great idea that you've then got, I can't decide if it's a mobile phone network, or an internet network that's made up of kids that you say, by the way, I'll go and find this for me and bring it back, sort of thing. It's such a good idea, because then the story can move on, and meanwhile there's, I don't know how many kids involved trying to find, you're not saying
down the docks looking for a boat. Yeah.
I love the fact that we get the irregulars, we get the dog, which the dog's hilarious, not a bloodhound, and we get all of these little things that are kind of synonymous with Holmes. We get the fact that he's a master of disguise. We get the fact that he's got some really odd friends in peculiar places. They rock up to this lodge, and the guy won't let the porter, bodyguard, whatever you want to call him, won't let them in. And then eventually it turns out that actually, no, he recognizes Holmes from bare knuckle boxing, because Holmes nearly knocked him out. I just love it's utterly insane, really. But it's just so perfectly put together that you go with it. Yeah. And it's just cracking.
Here's a question for the group, actually, just on that note. If you read that in a modern police procedural, we're using sort of superlatives to describe how fantastic it is and how modern it is and all the rest of it. But if you read something like that nowadays, I think an audience, and I'm as guilty of it as the next person, would go, "Oh, come on, that's how the porter recognises him, is that he was once fought against each other with bare knuckle boxing. Come on, that's Deus Ex Machina to another level." But is it maybe because all of this stuff was introduced so far ago in that wonderfully sort of romantic that romantic era of writing, and in particular crime fiction, that actually we've now become as a society so much more jaded when it comes to these sorts of connections that we and again, one of the great things, I suppose, romantic is the term that I would use in terms of going back to read it, is that it felt like such a lovely trip back in time, literally back to 1890. And all the things about modernity and all the rest of it are lovely and very, very refreshing, but it was actually really, really good fun to have that sort of, that quick hop in the TARDIS back to 221B Baker Street. Right.
Yeah. We'll have to draw, Mary, you something you wanted to say?
Nope.
I was just going to draw a line under the sign of 4. The only other thing which I will add in is I love the idea that London just lives under that smog at night, which is going to be the best place for anything to go wrong. Like, you can't follow anyone, see anyone, know anyone, and it's just there the whole time. So that was The Sign of 4. That was Arthur Conan Doyle, Sherlock Holmes' second book. So we're moving on, and Lou's going to do the introduction for this one. So this is Thin Air by Lisa Gray. So I'll hand over to Louise.
I'm just going to read the back, I'm afraid. Private investigator Jessica Shaw is used to getting anonymous tips. But after receiving a photo of a 3-year-old kidnapped from Los Angeles 25 years ago, Jessica is stunned to recognize the little girl as herself. Eager for answers, Jessica heads to LA's dark underbelly. When she learns that her biological mother was killed the night she was abducted, Jessica's determined to solve a case the police have forgotten. Meanwhile, veteran LAPD detective Jason Price is in the midst of a gruesome investigation into a murdered college student moonlighting as a prostitute. A chance encounter leads to them crossing paths, but Jessica soon realizes that Price is hiding something about her father's checkered history and her mother's death. To solve her mother's murder and her own disappearance, Jessica must dig into the past and find the secrets buried there. but the air gets thinner as she crawls closer to the truth, and it's getting harder and harder to breathe. And we should have a little clip of Lisa reading from the book.
Jessica Shaw stared at the faces in front of her, thinking most of them were probably dead or didn't want to be found. Squinting against the afternoon California sunshine pouring in through the window, she got closer to the MacBook screen for a better look at the photos. There was a missing mom who'd vanished from her home in the middle of the day, the middle-aged guy who'd left for work one morning and never arrived at the office, the teenage girl who'd failed to return home after school. There were thousands of other similar tragic stories, all of the people apparently disappearing into thin air, dead or didn't want to be found. The way Jessica saw it, most missing adults fell into these two distinct categories, like a gambler in a Vegas casino deciding whether to nudge his pile of chips onto black or red. Red, they were probably dead. Black, they might just come back. After 7 years as a private investigator, 5 in New York and the last 2 in the road, she usually had a pretty good idea from the get-go which of those scenarios she was dealing with. Jessica was mentally sorting the faces on screen into blacks and reds when a waitress's voice broke into her thoughts. She quickly shut the laptop. A diner wasn't the ideal place for this kind of work, but she liked to think of shopping malls, motel rooms, gas station restaurants, hell, anywhere with a decent Wi-Fi connection as her office. It made her feel that she was really working and not just running away. Jessica continued skimming through the gallery of images on the screen, waiting for a face to pique her interest. Janine Solomon, 17, white, female, missing for 2 months, missing from Albany, New York. No way was Jessica going back to New York State. She kept on scrolling. John Preston, 59, white, male, missing for 6 weeks, missing from Richmond, Virginia. Too far to drive to from here, pass. She kept on scrolling. Chandra Williams, 39, black, female, missing for 18 months, missing from Coolidge, Arizona. That one was a maybe. Jessica checked her emails again. There was a new message in the inbox. The subject read, "Your next case." The sender was John Doe. Opening the message, she expected to see a query from a potential client with an outline of the case they wanted her to take on. Instead, there was only a website link. Jessica was wary of opening attachments from unknown senders, but she could see from its address that this one was for a missing person's website she was familiar with. She clicked on it. The page loaded up to show a missing persons listing with a photo of a kid of about 2 or 3 years old. She'd mousy brown hair and big blue eyes, and she was holding a Barbie doll in grubby chubby fingers. Jessica felt a hot flush hit her cheeks hard and fast, like sudden exposure to a tanning bed with no tubes. It couldn't be. She looked again. Holy crap. The scrape of metal cutlery on plates at the next table suddenly seemed far too loud. The smell of fried onions from the kitchen out back made her want to throw up all over the tabletop. Dead or didn't want to be found. Jessica Shaw now knew there was a third category she had never even considered. Those who didn't know they were missing.
Oh. Well, I'd just like to say that I did know Lisa before she started to sell shed loads of books, and to people that are tuning in, especially from abroad, you'll be wondering why she's not American. The accent is definitely not from the west coast of America. I can guarantee that. Brilliant.
Somebody asked me before, when we first put the books up for this, why we weren't doing any Scottish authors. And I was like, you've obviously never heard Lisa speak. It's very obvious where she's from. I also think it's very obvious to me, and it's maybe just me, that she used to write for a living. She used to be a journalist. And to me, I was reading the book thinking, oh, I like this. The pacing, talking about the pacing of the Sherlock Holmes, same here. Pacing's beautiful. Everything's moving forward, but sometimes it's a bit slower. Sometimes Jessica's got a hangover, so we don't go too fast, but it gives you time to digest what's come before. There'll be a little reminder of something you might have missed. I loved all of that. So you've got this lovely clear through line. You've got the fact that she packs in a lot of information, but it never feels like overload. And you've got the fact that she can do, in terms of figuring out the setting, all of that kind of stuff, just a few strokes. And it's just, it's like the choice of the beer and the whiskey in the bar. It's just exactly how it should be. I mean, I've been at LA once for like 3 days, so I'm not an expert. But from my tiny amount of knowledge of being there and my large amount of knowledge of watching it on films and telly, it feels real. It feels accurate. Whether it's actually accurate or it feels right, I don't know. But I loved all of that. And to me, that's kind of a journalist turned crime writer. There's a good train of them, and this is why you can turn the skills from one to the other relatively straightforwardly. And I loved it. And I love the fact that every now and again there's something you think, oh, it's got to be this. No. Lisa does not go for the obvious. Lisa likes to just go, no, we're not having that. We're going to have this over here. It's a bit different. There's lots of that, and it just made it so much fresher. Even in terms of Jessica finally meeting the cop, you would anticipate that normally, I don't know, third of the way through, maybe quarter of the way through. No, it's after halfway. She deliberately keeps them apart, deliberately keeps the cases apart for a long time. And it doesn't feel forced. It feels that this is the point where they should meet, and therefore that's where they will meet. And yeah, and it's just lovely. It flows. It really flows.
Mary?
Absolutely. I think it's a cracking thriller. Held my attention right from the beginning. Fabulous, very striking opening prologue where we have the killer speaking. It's fast-paced. It's very tightly written. There's nothing spare in it at all. And Jessica herself is an interesting protagonist who kind of goes from, I'm drifting, I'm aimless, I'm not very happy, I'll just scour the missing persons pages to look for my next case, to a woman on a mission. And it really takes off from the point where she knows that she has to find out who she is and what her story is. That is brilliant.
Jonathan?
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with everything that's been said. I think we need to campaign to get Lisa to read more of her books, because listening to the California stuff and the burgers and all that in a Glasgow accent is fantastic. Now, maybe that's just because I'm 5,000 miles away and I don't hear it. Have I mentioned that I'm in Canada? I don't think I have. I don't think that's been told about. So, listen, I completely agree with everything that's been said. One thing that I noticed, it was more from the construct of it. Louise, you hit the nail on the head with it. That kind of journalism background, short, sharp sentences. Mary, you're talking about it being so tightly written. Everything's lean. Everything's down to the bare bones, and not in any way, shape, or form in a bad way. That's the important thing for me with this book in particular, and Lisa's writing, is that you can use terms like, it's the bare bones, and that can be derogatory. That is used in a critical sense to describe that you're not getting enough, but far from it. And actually, it's a real talent. It's a real talent. And for me, one of the many reasons why Lisa is such a successful writer is exactly that, is being able to tell so much in the absolute minimum that you can do it. And exactly as you say, Louise, I genuinely think that's the journalist. I thought it was very kind of you saying that, journalism is a good training ground for crime writing. Yeah. If it is, I haven't been told about it, but there we go. That's life, right? Well, but thoroughly enjoyed this. One of my big takeaways from it is is that sense of atmosphere, that sense of setting. It's all the way through, right the way through to the last page. And again, without going into too many details, but there's a wonderful scene right at the end. I think it is literally the last page of the novel, where it describes. I won't go into the details of it, but the car pulls up to the side, and it's this cloud of dust, and coins flip to the side, north or south. And just you get completely sucked into it, and you're getting completely sucked into this setting, in this world, in this universe that, again, you almost, exactly as you said, Louise, you almost don't need to know what it's like, because it's been described so wonderfully well that whether it's accurate or whether it's not, it almost doesn't matter, because it's been completely painted for you, without it being so blatantly obvious. Like here's where all of this is happening. You get completely immersed in it. And it's genuinely, I thoroughly enjoyed this. Great story, obviously, fantastic story, really, really engaging characters. And like I said, the actual mechanics of how it's written for me were absolutely top notch.
I think I can add a bit of insight. I asked Lisa some questions to give us a little bit of background. And I actually asked about she volunteered the LA bit. She said, I have a family who live near LA and have visited the tourist parts, but I hadn't visited most of the places in thin air, including Eagle Rock. I got to know those places by driving around the streets on Google Street View and spending hours researching each place online, i.e. facts, local bars, restaurants. And that to me is where you can see the journalist and Lisa coming in, which is pulling all those little details, because it's actually relatively easy. I've written 4 books set in America, and it's relatively easy to get the top stuff right because you've kind of seen it every day on TV, or you've thought. It's much more difficult under the skin when you walk into the bar. It's the brands, or what do they call certain things, or how do they behave? That requires much more work to make it feel real than it does, because otherwise it feels cliched, and that's where it becomes a real problem.
I also feel it's another journalistic skill. I mean, it's not that other writers don't have it, but I also know that journalists do. Is she's taken all of this research, huge amounts of research, and she's put in that much. She's put in the little bit that she needs.
Yeah.
She's put in the bar, what they serve. She hasn't gone overboard on telling us what the best of the bar's like, what they're strict. Because you know what, it doesn't matter. I always think the difference between reading a novel that's set in a time and place written in a time and place v one that's set in that time and place, you can sort of tell the difference, because if you've done research, the temptation is always to put it on the page.
Yeah,
absolutely.
But if you go back to a book from that era, whether it's Sherlock Holmes or whether it's when we did Get Carter last year, the thing that strikes me about that is you can't really tell for an awful lot of the novel when it is.
Yeah.
Little things jump in, but mostly it's about the plot and the characters, and that's what you want. The setting is the background. It's got to feel right, but it doesn't. You don't need it to be jumping out at you. I don't want it to get in the way.
That's interesting that you say that, Louise, because I think as we all, well, any reader, but obviously the 4 of us here as readers, you know when it is like an information dump. You know when it feels like it's an information dump, and you get completely taken out of everything that's going on that's been built up until that point. And we've all been there. And the thing is, like I always say this, it's not an easy thing to do. It's not an easy thing to do, to be able to do all this research and not prove to the reader that you've done your research and it is accurate. But it can't come at the expense of telling the story. And I think you're absolutely right. I think Lisa did that so well in this particular novel. Is that it's capturing lightning in a bottle, right? That's what you want to do when it comes to a particular setting that you perhaps aren't necessarily from or overly familiar with, and doing it in a way that it still comes across as genuine, but without doing signposting, this is real because I did X amount of research in it. So I completely agree, and it creates that sort of atmosphere. And it's only little things. You're right, beer brands, names of places, even dialogue, even the language that's used, and kind of local dialect and things like that, and phrases and turns of phrase, they can suck you out of it, and it's so easy to get sucked out of it if it's not done right. And I think she did an absolutely fantastic job of it, and it's. On top of that, it's a great story, right? It's also a fantastic story, and that'll always help.
I think, Mary, for me, one of the things I wrote around Raymond Chandler-esque, and there's a Raymond Chandler bit to this in the back of my head when you read through it, because it almost feels like she's not the same type of person as when he did the Gumshoe Detectives, but there is an element in her head about the fact that Jessica is I'm just doing this, right? I does it make any sense that I'm doing it? Why am I doing this? What's the reason? Am I getting paid for it? Blah, 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 and all the rest. And I love that fact, because what it does is give you somebody who's got free reign. It's that sense of a person saying, I want to do this because the bit that Lisa just read gives you a really good example of, I've categorized it into 2 things. I'm interested in one, I'm not interested in the other. Well, hang on a minute. And I think the book's got lots of those hang on a minutes.
Yeah.
That for me, pull you along, take you on to the next page.
Yeah. I mean, there's lots of I love the way she mingles past and present. I like the fact that this is a woman who just doesn't care about anything except getting to the truth. And, you know, there are lots of people who need to be on their guard because she's going to do whatever she has to get there. And that makes her an interesting character. You know?
Yeah, like little bits. Like, I love the fact that everything she owns is in the back of a pickup. 2 suitcases and a cardboard box. Jeez, woman. I love the fact that she chooses where she's going to live next by what case takes her fancy. It's just wicked cool. You just want to do that, don't you?
It's also funny. You just said there, like, there's a character, Mac McCool, as a name. It's almost like, yeah, okay, it's just, but then Lisa actually said to us, the main character had a lot of different names before she got to Jessica Shaw. The name was a homage to 3 of my favourite fictional characters: Jessica Fletcher from Murder, She Wrote, Jessica Wakefield from the Sweet Valley High books, and Carrie Bradshaw from Sex and the City.
Nice. Yeah.
Wow. Nice. What a weekend that would be.
I want to go to that party. Actually, no, I don't, because someone's going to die. The chances are it's not that. And I also think it's just, for me, it's that thing about missing children cases. That's extremely hard to write about well, because it's quite emotional. It's a hell of a thing to lose a kid. And I think that's what makes it interesting to me, is that she's managed to find a way of not making it, what's the word I'm looking for? Not negative. It is, but not a drag you down sort of, oh God, look what happened. It's more akin, I just need to figure this out. Like, I'm going to work out.
Yeah, it's not mawkish or anything. Well, I suppose the fact that, she's still alive is a big help. A lot of missing kid stories, you're kind of assuming that they're dead. The thing I like about it also is that we've got a college student who's moonlighting as a sex worker. But she's not just a dead body in front of a, she's not a naked dead body in front of a cop in a raincoat. She's a real person. You go back into her story and you see how she gets there. That you didn't need that. She could have just been. That girl could have just been the MacGuffin, because what's important is not her or indeed the cop. It's the killer. She said very carefully, trying not to give anything away. But she could have just been a dead body, and there could have been a string of dead girls. Yeah. And a lot of people would have been very tempted to do 2 or 3 dead girls. No, you don't. You get a dead girl, but then you get her as a person. You get the why she's there, and that makes it so much better.
It's an important part, though, isn't it? It's an important part of modern crime fiction, and it's becoming even more and more important that the victim isn't just the mechanic to move the story forward, indeed start the story, and it's really, really good to see done well.
Yeah,
right.
And it's done very well. And like Mary says, we go back into Eleanor's story, and Eleanor's not the greatest of mothers, not the greatest of people, but you kind of get a bit of that viewed quite carefully as well. You get all of that. I mean, it is becoming a bigger thing in crime fiction to not have strings of dead women. But sadly, there are too many dead women who are MacGuffins for a story, and it's just so fantastic to see it done well. I mean, Lisa's a woman writer. I would anticipate that she's going to do it well.
Yeah.
But just to say, you can hold this up and go, this is how you do it.
Yeah. So we'll need to move on, but that's Lisa Gray, and that's Thin Air, and it's got a general round of applause from everybody in terms of reading it. So the last book we're going to discuss is Vaseem Khan's Midnight at Malabar House, and Mary's going to do a bit of intro before we see Vaseem read a little bit of the book.
Okay. Malabar House is home to the city's most unwanted police officers. It's where the disgraced or difficult to deal with are sent. It's a place for misfits. And that's where Persis Wadia, the first woman police officer in India, is based. She's on duty when she gets a call to say that an important British diplomat has been murdered. He's discovered in a locked room. trouserless at his own New Year party in Bombay in 1949. And the case has landed in Percis's lap. And I think we're going to have a bit of a reading from Vaseem.
We are.
Hi all, Vaseem here. First of all, thank you very much for picking Midnight at Malabar House for your book club. Greatly appreciated, and the next time I see you all, I shall buy you a dangerous wild animal of your choice. Now, I've been instructed, on pain of death, to dive straight into the reading, no pussyfooting around. And as everybody knows, I always do exactly what I am told. So we're going to start on page 33. The day before, Persis has been tasked with solving the murder of a senior English diplomat in Bombay, and now she is arriving at her police station. The building was a 4-storey Edwardian affair, neoclassical in look and ambition. Built by Scotsman George Whittet, the genius behind the Gateway of India monument, the front facade was a sea of red Malard stone, broken up by a series of horizontal grooves and casement windows. Balustraded balconies fronted some of the windows, and here and there the ugly rear ends of air conditioners overhung the street. A succession of spouted gargoyles looked down onto passing traffic from the edge of the roof. Where water had poured from their mouths, the facade's stonework was discoloured and unsightly yellow. On the ground floor, an arcaded front entrance emblazoned with the words Malabar House was guarded by a uniformed doorman. The building housed the only police station in the Malabar Hill area, an affluent enclave overlooking the Back Bay. The region had become home to many Brits when the old Bombay fort had been demolished a couple of decades earlier. Now it was an acropolis of wealth and power, its inhabitants largely insulated from the whirl of history unfolding around them. She walked in through the entrance, the doorman salaaming her smartly. In the lobby, a vision of white marble, terrazzo, lacquered wood, and endlessly spinning ceiling fans, a trio of dogs raised their heads, then went back to reclining in the shadows. The dogs were strays who had wandered in one day and made themselves at home. Now they had become Malabar House's unofficial mascots. 6 months after moving in, it continued to astonish Persis how easily they had fallen into the rhythms of the place. It was as if they were a spoke inserted into a moving wheel or a gasket into a running engine. The building was located on the relatively sedate John Adams Street, owned by and headquarters to one of the country's great houses of commerce. Indeed, it was only thanks to the generosity of that particular corporation's patron that they had been given the building's basement as a temporary HQ for their new crime branch unit, set up to handle some of the more sensitive cases overflowing from the state's overworked and under-resourced Criminal Investigation Department, the much-maligned CID. At least, that was the story they had been told. They all knew, of course, that the real reason they had been sent there was because no one knew where else to put them. They were a menagerie of misfits, to use the phrase one newspaper had coined. The unwanted and the undesirables. If such a label bothered her, she tried not to show it. She had always known that life as the force's first female police detective would be a trial of prejudice.
Brilliant.
Perfectly set up. Mary, so what did you think of the book?
I really like it. I like it because Persis is an interesting character, and she's in an interesting time, and there's a lot that she has in common with what's going on in India, in the sense that India's about to become, it's after partition, India's becoming its own nation. Persis is a unique figure in the police service. She's the first and the only woman inspector. And they've put her in Malabar House because they don't know what else to do with her. Because she's in their eyes, she's not someone who can give orders to men. She's a misfit. And Malabar House is a bit like Slough House, I think.
Yeah, that struck me.
And so what happens is they give her this case precisely because it's political and it's dealing with someone of importance. And no one in the hierarchy of the police force wants to touch it in case it goes bad and their careers get damaged. So that's how she ends up with it. And I think that's a brilliant position to be in. because Persis is from, in that sense, she's the outsider. She's not part of the police establishment, and she's not part of the Indian establishment. And in fact, she's naive, she's idealistic, and she's also quite stubborn and awkward. So taking this case on is going to be a big lesson for her, as much as anything else.
Yeah. And Lou, one of the things we just talked about Lisa, where it was hiding some of the research, but to be fair, and it's not, Vaseem uses it in terms of telling you stuff because he's, what do you think that, how does that work with it? I've got my view on that, but I'll let you, that idea of there's a lot of stuff in here which sets the scene very, very, very well. And he uses it in a way that I'll let see what you say first before I get there.
Okay. I'm going to start by saying I did enjoy it. I liked it. I would like to continue reading the series. There is an awful lot to like in here. And I did pick up the Slough House thing. There's some lovely homages to Agatha Christie. I know Vaseem's a big fan, but they're done nicely. Persis has this eye for detail when she first goes to the crime scene. The weirdness of the lack of trousers. That's such a lovely little, weird thing to add. There's a big scene towards the end where she brings a whole bunch of people together and gets to be in a room with them. Very Christy, lovely. The partition stuff. Now, what I know about partition is it happened. I know literally nothing about it. I wonder if I'd known a little about it, I might have got more from this, because there's an awful lot of information in here. And I did find myself thinking, I could do with a bit less of that right now. Could we have a bit more plot here? It felt a bit unbalanced to me. It felt like there was an awful lot of stuff going on in the background that was in the foreground a bit much. And some of the stuff that should have been there kind of wasn't quite. You also get, the politics is complicated and it's important, and we don't know enough about it. The depictions of the violence that had happened during partition is absolutely shocking and terrifying. But I couldn't quite work out kind of what he was trying to say about it sometimes. It was a lot of, this is what it was like during partition. And it's like, yeah, but that's not in the past. That's like a fortnight ago. I sort of didn't quite click with that. And you also get a lot about Persis's personal life. Now, I love a bit of personal life, and it's because of her situation. It's always going to be interesting. It's always going to give you a nice bit of tension. But again, there was just a bit much sometimes. I felt like, and this is going to sound really, let me just word that a bit better. It was like Vaseem had taken everything he wanted to put in there, put it all in, and didn't quite trust himself to take some of it out and like leave it because it's the start of a series. It was designed at the start of the series. So, you've got a whole series to say all this stuff. I did feel like one or two things you could have just taken them out and put them in book 2. And we'll just have a bit less of that. And then you can have a bit more plot, or a bit more of Persis and Archie's kind of toing and froing, which was hilariously funny in some cases. It's just brilliantly done, because they're the most awkward people in the entire city by the two of them. Neither of them fit in any way at all with either their families, their friends, their work colleagues, anything. So they are perfect, and yet they're just this complete mismatch even there. Loved all of them. Just could have just done with a bit less of that for now. Not that I'm not interested in learning about it in book 2, but there was just a bit much of it going on for now for me.
Jonathan?
Well, I'm going to have to completely disagree, Louise. I'm sorry. This is me. See, I'm like you, right? Other than knowing that history had happened, completely ignorant to it, and I was completely sucked in by it. I was totally lost, and I read it, right? I read it, and I actually dropped Vaseem a message on Twitter, and he very, very kindly came back and said to me that as very kind words, Jonathan, particularly given that you gave me the runaround at the Scotland versus England football game at bloody Scotland in September. And I said to him, I don't think I've ever given anyone the runaround in any activity, let alone physical activity in football, what have you. Scotland won that, by the way. Just get that out there.
Yes, we did. I remember that result.
Yep, I got the equaliser, like last minute equaliser, and then well, we shan't go into that. But yeah, I'd mentioned it to him, and you know, I'd read it, and then I had a fairly lengthy road trip last week it was, and I got the audiobook version of it, and it's a wonderful job. It's Maya Saroya who does the
brilliant, isn't she?
And she is wonderful. She personifies every single one of those characters plus the narration, and it makes such a big difference. and the you know, it genuinely made the journey go on. And I don't know if it's because I'd read it before, and you know, I'd had that sort of base history, and I could maybe afford lose myself within the sort of history and the histrionics of it. And the family history and stuff like that. Perhaps it is because I already had that grounding having read it before. But I mean, I thoroughly enjoyed it. I really loved it. To me, it immersed me entirely, not just in the place but also the time. Mm-hmm. And I came away from it. I came away from the novel as a whole thinking, do you know what? That's how you set up a massive cast. That's how you start a series, right? That's, you know, not only are you just using it as a platform to introduce the reader to these characters in this setting, and it's a wonderfully rich setting, a wonderfully rich place and time to mine for stories, particularly crime stories, and brilliant characters, fantastic characters to a T. But I was like, that's how you do it. That's how you set these things up, and that's plus you've got a fantastic, obviously, whodunit that's there. And again, we've already talked about that tonight, haven't we? We've talked about that fairly extensively with all the books that we've had. Is that, you know, a good whodunit, a juicy whodunit will always get you through. And again, there's another one here. Yeah, I really enjoyed it. Again, I don't know. It's one of these things. It's really, I mean, it's fascinating. It's fascinating to see this, you know, these one particular things have such sort of diametrically opposed opinions of it. But I was completely immersed by it.
I think the problem was I would get immersed in a history bit, or I'd get immersed in this bit about Percy's personal life, and then I would be like, hang on a minute, isn't there a plot going on? I just kept getting disconnected. It's obviously just me, because everybody else is perfectly happy. I just got a bit disconnected with it. It was fascinating. And I would, like I say, I would read it again. I would read the rest of the series because it is utterly fascinating. I just could have done with I don't know. Somehow the structure of it didn't quite do it for me, but the content does.
I think for me, the reason I asked the question is, it's so soon after partition when this starts that the whole book, all the tensions, Robert Campbell, all the people inside it, the world has just done this. Yeah. So I think it needed it, because otherwise it'd be a case of, well, why are they acting that way? Because I don't know anything about partition, but I get from this book that the world used to be this way, and now the world is not that way. The world is now this way, and these people are all having to deal with that. And Percy, even her in her own ways, having to deal with everything's changed. People that used to be high up are low down. People that are low down are now high up. People that were against each other, fighting each other. And I liked that, because you got that sense. And I got a real sense of, because I asked Vaseem, did he have any background information, just to say, and he was saying that a lot of the people are actually unusually based on people he knew. Places he was actually in, the bookshop, which I think is just what the camel in the bookshop. I just nearly wet myself, like in terms, just fantastic. Just wait till you get there. Oh, yeah. But it was actually based on, what was it? T.N. Shandbag, former proprietor of Mumbai's oldest bookstore. You could always smell the books. Mary, you were going to say, sorry, I jumped in.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, I mean, there's lots going on here, and that's part of what I love about it, and I love being steeped in the time. But part of what are a million motives for murdering this man, but one of them is very clearly political, because he was looking in into the crimes of partition on behalf of the Indian government. And that's an important part of the story. But it's also a time when, because we're on the cusp of the world's biggest democratic nation, really, everything is changing. And what you're getting is actually an Indian perspective on that change, rather than a British perspective, which I think is really important. And Persis is part of that change. And it's about taking charge of your destiny. And I like that. I like that she's paired up with Archie, who's a terrific character and a very good. I mean, there's this brilliant moment when Persis has gone off on one, and kind of lost her temper, and she stomps out, and she gets to the door, and Archie just says to her, "Persis, a little kindness wouldn't go amiss." And you just think, oh, whack.
It's good, because I also think what I also quite liked was some of the there's a couple of phrases jumped out, but I loved one where the person had just told a whopper, and the way it was described was the lie flapped around the room, then vanished through an open window. It's just a lovely way to say, we all know you've just told a lie, but we're just going to ignore it.
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry.
Sorry, Lou, you were going to say?
No, I was going to say, it's not that I dislike it. I like it for all the reasons that everybody else does, in a way. It's just that I would have liked my history in slightly smaller chunks throughout the book. Because I did keep getting lost in it and engrossed in it. It is a better word, because it is fascinating. It's not something I know anything about, and it is shocking. And as Mary says, it's great to see that from an Indian perspective, from Persis' perspective, which is always going to be slightly different because she's a younger generation and because she's female. I just kept getting lost.
Right. We're actually running out of time. We're hitting the time button. But there's a couple of things I just wanted to say that came in from Vaseem, and there's a couple of comments I want to say. One is, in terms of based on real people, he said Robert Campbell's based on a Scot I worked with. His name was Troy. He was a riot, perpetually furious, and also the most fun to be around. He used to begin each morning with 2 shots of cheap vodka. And it's like, so, and the driver is based on someone. So I was going to say to him, you should publish this you sent me, because the stories in here, you can kind of get where they came from. Just in terms of a couple of comments, Zara said she loved Midnight at Malabar House. Yvonne Stanton said, really enjoyed it. I'm looking forward to the rest of the series. Anne had said, thought Midnight at Malabar House was really good. My favourite of the 3, made for an interesting comparison in some ways with Abir Mukherjee's Sam Wyndham series, and of course, as mentioned, Erin's Slough House. And Helen Burt says, having these readings is wonderful, having the readings that are actually on there. Just one thing I should go back to is when Thin Air, there was a couple of people I just want to mention. Sharon Bearden jumped in. She loved Thin Air. Hi, Sharon. Yvonne Stanton said she came to the party late, so she hasn't read it. Well, you have to stand in the corner for an hour with the dunce's hat on. That's probably not correct anymore.
And a book in your hand.
Yeah, you're not allowed to do that. And Helen Burt said she loved Thin Air. So I think we're just hit 9 o'clock, so we're just after 9 o'clock. So we could talk about
8 o'clock in our country.
Have I told you I was in Spain? No, I haven't.
You might have mentioned it in passing, I'm
Jonathan,
sure.
where is it you are? So a couple of
it's only 1 o'clock here. It's only 1 o'clock here.
A couple of things I need to make clear. The next actual book club of this won't be till July. It's July the 26th if you want to put it in your diary. It's Abir Mukherjee who's doing it. We'll get you the details. Between now and then, we are going to do on, I can't remember the exact dates, but we will come up with recommended readings for the summer. So we will be coming up with the Scotland Book Club going forward. I forgot to introduce myself at the beginning. This is really good. You're an hour in and they're all going, who's the ginger-haired guy that's sitting there? And I never did it. It's just stupid. So I'm going to use 10 seconds to say, name's Gordon Brown. My new book, No More Games, is set in Glasgow in 1974. 3-day week, power strikes, power cuts, sorry, inflation. It could have been written today, but it's written in 1974 and it comes out tomorrow. So that's my plug for my book, but my name's Gordon Brown. And I'd just like to give a big thanks to Louise, to Mary and Jonathan for taking the time to do this. I'd like to say a huge thank to everybody that tuned in. It's just great to see the questions and the interaction. And the books, if you've missed it, and you probably haven't, but the books are up on Bloody Scotland. We will be posting this up in due course. So if you want to sit and suffer through this for another hour, having watched it, I'm sure some of you you'll be watching it 4 or 5 times. I'm sure it's like a very, very, it's a fine wine you can go back to on a frequent basis. So from our point of view, I'd just like to say thanks very much for tuning in. And as I said, a beer will be back on July the 26th, but there will be stuff in between. And between then and now, we will be launching Bloody Scotland 2023, but that's a bit down the line and there'll be more information in due course. So thanks very much to everybody.
Thank you.